Welcome to the PARTF Accounting Workshop. Congratulations on receiving a grant this year. Because of limited funds, projects were extremely competitive, so good job on a well put together application. During this video, we will cover Parks and Recreation Trust Fund Grant Program General Information, expectations of the grantee throughout the project period, reimbursements, and closing out your project. Pages 1 through 3 of the manual include general information. Here you will find definitions, a little bit about the Parks and Recreation Authority, the governing board who awarded your grant, and contact information. Should you have questions, your first point of contact is the Recreation Resources Service consultant assigned to your region. Please maintain close communication with this person throughout the grant period. Understanding your contract is very important. Read your contract carefully. If you haven't yet done so, please sign and promptly return your contract to the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources in Raleigh. Your next step is to read the manual in its entirety. I cannot stress that enough. Some of you have received grants in previous years. The manual goes through periodic updates, so things may have changed since your last grant. The manual should be read from start to finish each year. We do anticipate a new manual will be released in the latter part of 2020. Components of the grant include grant conditions, which you will find on page 4 of the manual. These are conditions you have agreed to, including but not limited to state bidding and contract requirements, compliance with the American with Disabilities Act, consequences for failure to comply with the terms of the contract, records retention, park operation and maintenance, and the public use requirement. A lot can be found on page 1 of your contract. The contract number this year will start with 2020, since they were funded in fiscal year 2020. The project period, start and end date, and the scope of work, which is a description of the land acquisition and/or facility development the grantee is obligated to complete, and of course, the grant amount. The scope of work also includes attachment B of your contract. Another component is the list of project costs that were submitted with your application. Completing all items on this list are obligations of the grantee, even if not listed in the description of the project on attachment B or page 1 of the contract. Persons allowed to sign on the local government's behalf are authorized employees or elected officials listed on page 2 of your contract and/or listed on the basic facts and assurances page submitted with your application. If you are using a third party to administer the grant and want to give them permission to sign on behalf of the local government, official documentation making this request must be received by the North Carolina Division of Parks and Recreation from the local government. This is not typical and is handled on a case-by-case basis. Changes to any of the contract components require advance approval and contract amendment from the Division of Parks and Recreation. Things you want to keep in your project file are listed here. If you are not already registered with the state for e-pay and would like to receive your reimbursements electronically, notify your RRS consultant and they will provide you the proper form to enroll. Retain your contract, any amendments, accounting documentation, inspections, project cost, and any revisions, site maps, and other correspondence for 5 years following final payment and close of your project. If you have an acquisition project, retain copies of deeds, appraisals, surveys, maps, offer to purchase, statement or waiver of just compensation, waiver of retroactivity if applicable, proof of payment, evidence of title, etc. These will be covered more when we walk through reimbursements. The grantee has 1 year from the execution of the grant to begin substantial work. This is monitored by a series of inspections conducted by your RRS consultant. The 6-month inspection could possibly be done by phone. All subsequent inspections will be conducted on site with both your consultant and an approved representative for the local government in attendance. Before we move into reimbursements, again, let me stress the importance of reading the manual in its entirety. Before you start your project, make sure you understand what PARTF will and will not cover. PARTF does not cover cost outside the project period. There is a planning exception. Planning costs such as application preparation, appraisals, surveys, necessary permits, or design costs incurred within 2 years before the application submittal date are eligible if they were included in the project cost. PARTF does not cover items not included in the project scope or in the applicant's list of project cost, state and local sales tax, the purchase of construction equipment and small tools, sports equipment, office or concession stand equipment, financing costs associated with the project, costs incurred by the sponsor due to breach of contract, cost overruns, donated or in-kind labor, costs not documented by an invoice or other conclusive proof of payment, legal fees. There is a land acquisition exception on page 12 of the manual. Environmental cleanup costs are also not covered. If you have a question about the eligibility of an expense, your RRS consultant should be able to clarify. The grantee is responsible for maintaining fiscal controls and accounting procedures that are based on generally accepted accounting standards and principles. The following minimum requirements must be met. Establish a separate account and supporting documents for the grant. Use the grant's project number for coding all expenditures. Itemize all supporting records and documents of project expenditures by project element as listed in the applicant's project cost. Records and documents must have sufficient detail to show the exact nature of the expenditures and that are directly related to the project element. Please reference the invoice description on page 7 of the grant manual. Invoices should be made out to the local government, include name and address of the vendor, date of service or purchase, quantity of items purchased, description of the item purchased or service rendered, unit price, and total amount of each line. Please note, estimates, quotes, or purchase orders will not be accepted in lieu of an invoice. Submit legible documentation in its entirety. Submit all pages of documentation, even if blank. Check your math. Make sure request is signed by an approved representative of the local government. Reimbursement requests can be submitted as often as quarterly and with a minimum of $2,500 of expenditures incurred. Planning is capped at 20% of project cost. Now, on to the bulk of this video. Let's walk through a reimbursement request.